Good evening, Promised Land. I'm so glad that you've joined us on a Wednesday evening. We're in a beautiful moment right now where we've kind of got a little bit of extra time, many of us, to consider, to ponder, to look at the choices we've been making, to think about our lives and what's brought us to the moment that we're in. And I believe that it is the will of God that we always live intentionally, but I know that a lot of times life gets on top of us. Right now, for those of us that are still heavily involved in our workplace, there's a shell crew at the church, for instance, and some people are in essential categories, that kind of thing, and are maybe more under a workload than they were prior to that. We're kind of struggling with the opposite issue, which is that most of you have probably experienced most of your work life, that work tends to kind of ride you. And that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. Is it's hard to stop and take a breath and make sure that what we're doing intentionally, we're doing it on purpose, that we're staying on mission, and that our work is truly powering our purpose. And in survival mode, it's really easy to get just kind of caught up in just doing what it takes to get by. So for those of us, and there are many of you that are in this boat right now, you're having to do maybe more than you were before the supposed shutdown, before the quarantine, before the stay home and all of that. And so we're struggling with one side of this, and there's another piece that a lot of people are dealing with right now, which is suddenly, if my normal 9 to 5 or 70 hours a week or whatever it's been, that's not in place, and now I'm stuck home. Why do I get up in the morning? What is my purpose? What is my direction? I see people saying they are bored. And that is inconceivable. If you can reconnect with your purpose and the reason that God put you on the earth, this time period should be anything but boring. This is your greatest opportunity to accomplish things that have been on pause for years. Remember, just stop and think back in your mind to 4 weeks ago. I just touched my face. Maybe we'll edit that out. Maybe we won't. Think back to 4 weeks ago when you talked about all of the things you wanted to do that have to do with your purpose and bemoaned the fact that work kept you from your purpose. Well, now you don't have the work, but maybe you haven't figured out how to connect with your purpose in this moment. I wanted to read a quick reading from the book of Psalms. Psalm chapter 70 says, "Make haste, hurry, O God, to deliver me. Hurry to help me. Make haste to help me, O Lord. Let them be ashamed and confounded that seek after my soul. Let them be turned backward and put to confusion that desire my hurt." There's a lot of talk these days about haters. And everybody apparently has haters. Even people that don't have a platform apparently have haters. And sometimes I think that just means you've got people in your life that tell you truths that are uncomfortable for you. But there are probably people, if you've achieved anything in your life that was worthy, and I'm sure that you have, if you've managed to accomplish anything that someone that knew you at a lesser time in your life would not have bet on, then there are people that weren't betting for you. They were betting against you. And they're uncomfortable with that fact, and you've experienced it. But that's not really how I read this. That's not directly what this is. You have an enemy of your soul, the God of this world, that does not want to see you accomplish the purpose for which God brought you into existence. And that is who the psalmist is asking. Let them be put to confusion. Let them be ashamed who desire my hurt. Let them be turned back for a reward of their shame, that say, aha, got him. Let all those that seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee. And let such as love thy salvation say continually, let God be magnified. Let God be magnified. But I am poor and needy. Make haste unto me, O God, You are my help and my deliverer, O Lord. Do not tarry. If we could just acknowledge that tonight. I'm poor. I'm needy of spirit. I need help. Things aren't quite right. I'm not feeling great about the way things are right now. I don't feel like I'm on a solid footing. Then God would be very near to us to help us. We began this series last week with a quote from the prophet Malachi that those who feared the Lord spoke often one to another. That's what we want to do tonight. That's why we've asked our friend and our fellow pastor here in the Life Family Churches, Dr. Octavious Bishop, back to join us again. And just a wonderful resource for us, a professor of psychology with a biblical worldview. It doesn't get much better than that. And I've asked Asbel Montez, who's just a really wonderful perspective that he brings from being in leadership, really involved in leadership in the corporate and governmental side of everything that's going on right now. And these are two amazing God-centered perspectives. If we could just cry out to the Lord right now, hurry and help me, and acknowledge that I'm poor and I'm needy and I need your help and I have an enemy that doesn't want to see me prosper, then I believe if we'd approach these conversations with that attitude, we'll get a lot out of them. So without further ado, I'm going to ask you to just grab your notepens. It's just a few minutes until we break up into our classes. Grab your notepads and your pen and get ready for a great God-centered discussion about a Christian response to mental health. And this time, we're talking about how that impacts us in the workplace. And I love you. I can't wait to hear the report of how God used this conversation. It may be pretty raw and pretty honest at points. And I'd love to hear how God used it to sort of kick the bucket over in your life and let some things spill out that have been needing to spill out for a while. God bless you as you jump in with us on this conversation.
Thank you, Pastor Schulz. Well, I'm going to say, as they say with a Dr. Phil, I'm glad to be on the same stage with Dr. O. And I do not mean that disrespectfully at all. Pastor, doctor, whatever you want to call it. We're going to call you Dr. O for this time as well. I'm reminded in the scriptures, because we're talking about some subjects that are typically in our background, doctor, that could be a little faux pas. I'm not just outside of the corporate realm and in leadership and do a lot in the leadership in what most would consider in the secular world as well. But my dad was also a pastor, so I know what it is to grow up in a minister's home. Grow up with the ideology that some perspective was, well, son, just go to the altar and pray about it, and God's going to take care of all those issues that you might have encountered, whether it's worry, anxiety, depression, what have you. So, however, I'm reminded in the scriptures where it says in Proverbs 11:14, where there is no counsel, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. That's right. And I think that applies not just only in biblical concepts, but also as we deal in the world of mental health. And how does that impact us in the workplace? Yes. Another scripture as we kind of work in there is Romans 8:28. Talks about, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God. That's awesome. To those who are called according to his purpose. But what happens when we cannot see the good? That's right. What happens when we can't see the good, Dr. O? You know, because we're human. I'm human. So in the workplace, what happens, and a lot of us will beat ourselves up, that says, God, I know that we're called to be good. I know that everything that you said is good and pure and just, but I've got these moments of anxiety. I have these moments of worry. I'm going to work. I'm one of those that still have a job. But every time that I go, I'm thinking, am I going to be furloughed? Yes. Are they going to reduce my hours, which they have? And some of us have been going through that. It's, okay, how am I going to get to the next check? You know, and I've been a wise steward of my money. I've saved a little bit, but there's no end to the sight that's going on. And I hear everybody telling me I've got to trust in the Lord or what have you, but it still sometimes isn't helping with the anxiety and the worry that I'm feeling. So how do I address that as a Christian?
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you. It goes really back to what Pastor Schultz talked about. It was about purpose. But purpose doesn't come without steps. Purpose doesn't come without a plan. God's purpose surely has steps and strategies and things that he's placed in our lives to help us move toward that purpose. But worry doesn't help us. Even though worry doesn't help us, worry is something that we all deal with. Anxiety is something that we all deal with. And in this lifetime, unfortunately, depression is something we'll deal with at some point too. But what I've learned is my worry has never solved a problem. My worry has never solved a problem. And what I've been anxious about really has been the culprit in leading me toward depression. In our society, I teach this in my psychology classes on really paying attention to ourselves and being aware about what's taking place when we've experienced something traumatic, and we are experiencing something traumatic. And tonight we're talking about people's finances and talking about their livelihood. That's traumatic. Well, I've never met anybody that wasn't anxious before they were depressed. And anxiety is, all feeling is a gift from God. A good feeling, a bad feeling, anxiety, even depression has its place related to turning us back to the Father. So when we think about our purpose and who we are, we must truly address anxiety. It's the first sign before life truly becomes unrattled. It's a warning sign to what's taking place. And the people are worried. Our people are anxious. People are losing their jobs. But it's so important to be aware of what's taking place. So to take a few checks in yourself. Where are you? What are some things that you were doing in the rhythm of your week or your day that you were doing before these 3 weeks come up? We're just on the third week. It feels like it's been 3 years, but it's only been the third week. How did you get to this space outside of just the COVID? The COVID piece is something that came to hit you. We didn't have you. First of all, we have to recognize we didn't ask for this. You know, this is something that came and kind of slapped us in the face, and now we're left to deal with it. And the ramifications of that are people are losing their livelihoods and what they've worked for beforehand. But it's never been about what we worked for. It's always been about God's purpose. And if we focus on the purpose of where God wants to take us, then that's how we move toward looking at the game plan God has for our life.
So, you know, as you bring that up or whatever, I'm reminded that one of my, probably one of the individuals that I revere and really look up to outside of when I read the scriptures and Jesus Christ is Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. Townsend are phenomenal mental health counselors, but also extremely from a very Christian biblical base. So they're very deep in their Baptist religion. And they bring a faith-based concept to this. And he was speaking the other day about thoughts. Because I was thinking about it from the anxiety piece, the worry piece, is a thought is a thought.
Yes.
And what we have to do, and it's what the Bible talks, is the thought. Sometimes it's just a thought, and as long as we don't entertain it and dwell on it, that's where sin typically will happen.
Oh, yeah.
That's where you begin to entertain. The thought is typically where bad starts to happen, or good even starts to happen, if it's a good thought or it's a bad thought. But when anxiety comes in, and the one thing that Stephanie and I have been talking about through this process is we've got to train our thoughts on Him. And when we train our thoughts on Him, when worry seeps in, because it typically seeps in through a thought, when anxiety comes in, it's because usually I begin to dwell on the thought that says, I might be furloughed. Or God, are you truly going to do what you said? I don't see, I can't see in the darkness right now. You know, somebody was saying, and we talked about this, and it was a quote from Spurgeon that says, it's easy to trust God in the light.
That's right.
But it's hard to trust him in the darkness. That's where faith comes in.
Right.
So it's the same concept with thought and worry, is saying, okay, God, how do I line and get my thought process right?
That's right.
Can you talk to us a little bit about binding the mind? And I know I'm asking a very loaded question here with that, because really, if the devil can get our minds, he's got us.
That's right.
And that's why we've got to protect this. And a lot of the anxiety, worry, and I've got some questions about depression too, because a lot of this gets into your mind.
Yes.
And if the devil can control your mind, he's got you. So we know what the power is, and we know we can come and say, well, if you just speak the name of Jesus over it, yes, I get it. The power of God can take care of all of that. Talk to us about the thought process that we need to have in our work, and I know it can go across everywhere, but just in some of those concepts.
That is a beautifully put question, because you said you talked about the light and the darkness. Well, when does anxiety truly hit us? It hits us about 2 a.m. in the morning. It hits us about that 3 o'clock a.m. hour. And no matter how bad you're feeling, for some reason, when the light starts to come up, you start to get a little bit of hope to believe that, man, maybe I can make it to this day.
That's good.
But it's always in the dark. It's in the dark because there's an illusion that the light is never going to be coming back. And even COVID is an illusion. It's not, it's happening, but it's not something that's going to last. God has the say in this. God has the say in this whole, everything that's happening. So when we focus so much on our worries and our anxiety, we lose the ability to solve problems. And what happens is we get tied up and we limit ourselves. And we make our issues and even our jobs bigger than who God is. So it's really fitting how Pastor Schulz started this discussion about purpose. Anytime I get stuck in a situation, and I've been unemployed before, I've been in transition before, the gray areas of transition in just about every way in my life before, and it has caused me some angst. But the best way to get out of your angst is to start really pondering and praying and focusing on your future. God said it very clearly in Jeremiah 29:11 that he had a plan for you. Yes. And he has a plan for you. And if he has a plan for you, that in that plan is a hope in the future. I'm looking for two things, two words I'm really paying close attention to when someone comes in to counsel, to do pastoral care, or even a friend that's struggling through a situation. I need to hear hope and I need to hear a future. If I hear a hope and I hear a future, then I know that God is a part of that plan because he said it in Jeremiah 29:11. The problem is we just don't understand the path that he's making. And many times there's a lot of beauty in that in itself. This is a time where it can be a wilderness time for a lot of us. We don't know what's to come next, but we are able to plan. We can have strategy. We have been equipped way more than we ever thought we were equipped. There's a lot more talent. There's a lot more gifts, a lot more purpose than we've ever given ourselves credit for. So focus on purpose. Journal. If you need to journal, write it down. If you got goals and you haven't written them down, they're not any good. Right?
Right.
If you don't understand God's purpose in your life, that's because you haven't written down any goals that will lead you to that purpose. So write your goals down. Ponder on that purpose. Pray about that purpose. Pray for the purpose of your wife and your husband and your children. This is a beautiful time to be able to really stretch ourselves in this season.
Man, I'm feeling what you're saying. I'm feeling it. Yeah. And I think if we can get that in our spirit,
that's right.
When that happens, to understand purpose and understand hope.
Yes.
And to understand the words of Jeremiah 29:11.
Yes.
When you don't feel it and when you speak it, because the power of what you say has now been spoken into the atmosphere. And if we would understand the power of our words, the power of your words will either speak life or speak death.
That's right.
And so when you have a thought that comes in that's speaking death into your mind, begin to speak life. It's what we call, there's a phenomenal book out there that Dr. Cindy Trim wrote called Commanding your morning. And it is basically every scripture that there is something about the morning. When his word says his mercies are new every morning.
Every morning.
And as Dr. O was just saying here, there's something about the 2 or 3 o'clock when anxiety, when that worry begins to plague you, that come the 5 and 6 o'clock hour. If you will get up and you will begin to speak life into your situation when you don't see the situation. So you begin to command your morning in the early morning hours. There is a reason why there's so much that talks about in the morning time, Dr. O.
I know. Amen.
So if we command our morning in the worry and the anxiety that we feel, it's amazing why sometimes you were saying in that morning time you begin to feel a breath of hope.
You do. That's right.
It's because there's something about the morning.
That's right. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And we have to recognize that. It seems so elementary. It seems so small, but it's so big.
Yes.
It's so much bigger, particularly in this season where we can't get away from one another. We're working in our homes if you even have a job. Another thing about this, I was speaking with Pastor Schulz earlier, and I thought about this a lot, and I thought about the times that I didn't have employment, and I felt like I didn't have work. That was a lie too. The truth of the matter is, just because I don't have a job doesn't mean I don't have work. So getting up every morning to comb my hair, to brush my teeth, to wash my face, getting up in the morning to fix myself a cup of coffee, to get in my scripture, a devotional, to get my clothes on, and to do work. You don't have to be paid to do work.
Right.
We should always work no matter what.
Right.
There's a lot to be done, even if it's helping somebody else from a distance. But even if it's doing something else, people who get jobs usually have a job.
That's right.
People who are being elevated to positions are usually doing work. So this is a great time to stretch ourselves. And really, we've been disrupted. But through this disruption, growth is happening.
That's exactly correct. I'm going to kind of switch the subject and begin to take us into the next question that I have for you. And this is really involving depression. And I know that this is a faux pas word sometime in the religious sector, but it is a real issue that we're dealing with it right now in the midst of this COVID-19 public health emergency. Because we don't know if this is going to last. I mean, by all indications, this could be with us for the next several months. So when we peak, and then the downturn, I mean, the World Health Organization is beginning to issue out best practices on how societies can enter back into social interaction again. I mean, they're coming out. There was a phone call that happened this morning on a conference call where they were having a discussion on how societies that feel that they can begin to morph back into social interactions, how do you do that?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So this could be with us a while, and social interactions could be changing. So depression, we're 3 weeks into this.
That's right.
Depression is real. And I want to kind of tell it from, I'm the type, for anybody that knows me, is I learn best when it's relatable to me.
Yes.
And how do you identify? You might be working. You might have a spouse that's working. How do you identify elements to know if someone is in depression and you don't know it? That's right. And I'm going to give it from more of a personal piece of it. When this happened to me, it was probably 15 years ago. I was in my late 20s. And I was diagnosed borderline clinically depressive. Would never have seen myself as a depressive individual. But what was the key indicators to the counselor that I was seeing at that point in time was I worked a lot. I was a workaholic. I always was going, anytime somebody ever gave me, I was going 150%. Now, there was a lot of other things, and I have a fab, and this is not the time to talk about that story. One day that will be the story that we will talk about. But there was something that was a surprise even to me, But when I started to look through it, I'm thinking, oh my word, they are on to something as it deals, but nobody picked up on those cues. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm introverted. I'm an introvert by nature. Though most tend to not understand that, because but most people that talk, that are speakers actually are very introverted by nature. And so I had to understand that there were certain tools that they gave me, that this Christian counselor gave me, that I would begin to exercise.
Wow.
And I begin to go through these things whenever I would be feeling a certain way, but now I can identify those elements in others. And so unless you're looking for the signs, sometimes you don't see that there's a withdrawal. You might understand that something else is going on, but they may not be telling you, but you have to look at the nonverbals. So talk to me, Dr. Bishop or Dr. O, about depression, how it manifests itself differently in different signs. Males are different than females, and how that relates in the workforce, because they may be dealing with things and you can find out about it much quicker. So tell us a little bit about that.
Thanks, Asbel. This is really dear to my heart. My research is founded and grounded in anxiety and depression, and really looking for quantifiable markers related to depression. So how I relate this to your question is there are three things that I look for when I'm looking at somebody depressed. First of all, what happened? The significance of what happened that led them to the state they're in. Right now, because we're in week 3 of this whole quarantine state, basically, we have to look for first shock. What does shock look like? And what is shock for? Well, shock is really, in my biblically and godly and pastoral professional opinion, about God being soft with us and gentle with us. Shock is that numbing space between the grief that's about to follow. So usually there's a good period of shock. I can't believe of what's actually happening. What's going on. A lot of people may be waking up and saying, wow, I thought my job was secure because it was in the medical field. I've never had an issue with what I do related to my value and my worth in work. And then there's this numbing piece. But then the next phase, it moves to the grieving phase, which is tied up in a lot of different places. But I've never met a person who is depressed that wasn't anxious first. Anxiety precedes depression. The gift that God has given us is the awareness of what's happening that's leading us to depression. The only reason we end up in depression many times is because we didn't take heed to the cues that were leading us to depression. So there are things that happen in our lives like this. This has slapped us right in the face, right? And now it's placed us. If your best friend that you love came up and just slapped you, you would be in shock. Then you would move toward anxiety, going, my best friend, the person I love, just slapped me. Then you would move to the space of, wow, I've shared some really deep things with this person that I love. We may not be friends again. That's depression. So there are phases that we need to be paying attention to. So if you're living with somebody, if you're married, your spouse better many times probably than they know themselves. I know my wife knows me better than I know myself many times.
Right.
And for us to be really comfortable, we have to have an understanding of what intimacy is. Intimacy breeds temporary instability, meaning that in order to be intimate, sometimes you talk about the things that you really don't want to talk about. Like, wow, I've noticed that you haven't spoken in 2 hours.
Right.
Wow. Or the reactions that we're having within our homes because we've been around each other so long. Our reactions to our children, our reactions to each other, right? Our reaction to what's happening in our bank accounts. All of these things are happening, and they're causing anxiety. The truth of the matter is, by the time we realize that we're depressed, we didn't even know that we were depressed. You have already been depressed for a very long time. That's why it's so crucial to focus on purpose. Right. Purpose is an avenue out of depression. Purpose is something that dims our anxiety. It doesn't blind us to the realness of what's taking place, but it places our eyes on the thing that's most important, which is our purpose. Many of us, the truth of the matter is, we're going to find out. This is a pastoral piece of me. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
We're going to find out that a lot of us, we've just had jobs. We haven't had careers, and we haven't had calling. God has placed you into this space, and it seems like the worst place you've ever been, but it's actually a place for you to grow.
You know what? You've said that purpose, and sometimes God has called you into a calling. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because the depression comes because of anxiety and worry. Those are kind of the predicators to the depression. And we're bringing this from God and mental health.
That's right.
So let's talk about the God aspect of this. Because during this time, the world has shut down.
I know.
Not just portions of the world, not just states,
Jesus.
but the world has shut down, where God is trying to tell us, I believe, as a church, to recenter. Me personally.
Yes.
Me personally, who was traveling 4 to 5 times a week. You know what I'm saying? I was 4 to 5 days of the week I was gone.
I think I was trying to have coffee with you.
Last year I logged over 200 days on the road. Too busy for the Savior that created the world. Was I pursuing his calling or my calling? So sometimes maybe the anxiety and the worry that is put upon you is because you were pursuing the wrong calling.
Yes.
Now, I'm talking to myself. I can't talk for anybody else. I can't answer for anybody else. But what I can say is the journey that I've been on may be the preemptors to understanding how to navigate outside of anxiety and worry to really become God-focused.
That's right.
Dr. O. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's...
I 100% understand what you're saying. We have found out that business and markets are not the most valuable pieces to who we are. Our physical well-being, our mental health, and our spiritual health are the most important. It's God before culture. The climate has changed, the season has changed, and it's God before culture.
That feels like a great moment to conclude on God over culture. I think we're at the heart of it now. And this discussion just feels so productive to me, so relevant to where we're living and the conversations we need to start and foster, and the taboos we need to break in order to be effective. Because remember, the dark side is talking about this stuff. So if we leave a vacuum, then that's going to be where people get their guidance from. So I feel like we're really in a pocket here. And so I asked Dr. O, I really like that. I asked Dr. O, and I asked Asbel if he would also just stick around a little bit and continue this conversation. And we're going to do that next week. So I'm really excited about that. Right now, around me, the Facebook group should be popping up because we're right at the end of our 7:30 cutoff time, and we want you to go to your classes for tonight that are being held in the various groups. So as soon as we shut down this feed, go to those groups and check them out. They should be going live right about the same time with your classes. And I just think that this is a great moment to break on and come back next week with fresh minds. Let this work in you. Apply it, pray about it, talk about it, and see if the Lord would give you some insight for yourself out of this. Join us on the weekend. It's a big weekend. We start with a Facebook watch party to join with Life Family as they kick off the weekend on Good Friday. And then somewhere in the late hours, probably on Saturday, it will start to go sunrise various places around the world where we have good friends and ministries. At the end of the day, you're going to need to reconnect with your local church, and those are going to be on all kinds of continents. When this is all over, you need a spirit-filled, Bible-believing local church where you can be connected. And so if we can use Resurrection Sunday as an opportunity to promote some of those around the world, we want to do that. So we're doing Come and See Resurrection Around the World. And so as it goes sunrise in different places on different continents, the Promised Land feed will go live. We'll introduce a spirit-filled, Bible-believing pastor and ministry in some city on some other continent and tell people how to watch their resurrection service and all of that and promote them and pray for souls to come out of that. When it hits sunrise in Austin, we'll go live on our page with our own sunrise hymn and direct everybody toward our feed here. Invite everybody. Just tell everybody that you have any interaction with that we're going to be broadcasting on Easter Sunday, and get them there. And the Lord will bring the harvest of souls out of that. So we want to see that happen. We're excited to see that happen. I want you to go to your classes now and enjoy them. And the Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. The Lord be gracious to you and give you peace. See you on Easter.